8 billion people. It's a number so big, it honestly almost loses its meaning.
Yeah, it really does. It creates this sense of vertigo right off the bat.
Definitely. I read earlier that if you started counting right now, like one number per second, without sleeping or eating, it would take you over 250 years just to get to where the global population is today.
Which is wild. And usually when that number gets thrown around in the news or, at dinner parties, the vibe shifts instantly to panic.
Oh yeah, the overpopulation doom scroll.
Right. We immediately picture this crowded subway car that is just about to run out of oxygen.
But looking at the human geography research you brought in for us today, you are actually arguing that the sheer number of humans is the least interesting part of the story, which feels really counterintuitive.
I would actually argue it is the most misleading part of the story, because we aren't spread out evenly across the globe like butter on toast.
We're clumped together.
We are highly clumped. So the real story, the thing that actually drives human civilization, isn't how many of us there are. It is where we are.
Okay, so today we are doing a deep dive on population distribution and density. And I have to be honest, that title sounds like a chapter of a textbook you usually just skip to get to the pictures.
It does sound dry now.
Yeah.
Distribution and density. It sounds like a math problem. But if you really dig into the sources we have here, you realize that these two concepts are basically the operating system of our entire world.
The operating system, that is a pretty big claim.
But think of it like code running in the background of your life. The way we arrange ourselves on the map determines who holds political power. It dictates where money flows, who gets a heart surgeon within driving distance, and frankly, whether the planet's ecosystem holds up or snaps in half.
So our mission for this deep dive is to crack that code. We aren't just looking at dots on a map today. We are investigating the consequences of those dots.
Exactly. We are tracing the ripple effects. From the halls of government to the money in your bank account to the actual air you are breathing right now. It all comes back to density.
Well, let's start with the one that affects the rules of the game, the geography of power.
This is the political consequence, and it is arguably the most tangible, immediate impact of where people choose to live.
The setup here seems simple enough, but I really want to understand the mechanism. Like, if I get tired of the rain in Seattle and I pack up my moving van to head for the sunny plains of Montana, I think I am just moving my furniture. But the research says I am actually moving the government.
In a very literal sense, yes. You are moving political influence. You have to remember, specifically in the U.S. system, which is the primary case study in our sources here, political structure is inextricably linked to the physical location of bodies.
And this all comes down to the census, doesn't it?
It does. The U.S. Constitution mandates a head count every 10 years. And they don't do it just because they love statistics or, want to know how many people own cats. They do it because that data is the absolute bedrock of apportionment in the House of Representatives.
Okay, let's pause and clarify apportionment for the listener, because this is where it gets highly tactical. We aren't talking about the Senate here.
No, the Senate is fixed terrain. Every state gets 2 senators, whether there are 5 people living there or 5 million. Wyoming has the exact same voice in the Senate as California. That is land-based representation.
Right.
But the House, that is proportional. It is a zero-sum game based entirely on population density.
Zero-sum meaning if I win, you lose.
Precisely. There are currently 435 seats in the House. That total number doesn't change. So going back to your moving van example, if enough people leave Washington state and move to Montana, Washington doesn't just lose tax revenue. They literally lose a seat in Congress.
And Montana grabs it.
Montana gains a voice. And suddenly, Montana's specific issues, maybe agricultural policies, land rights, mining regulations, those issues get a louder megaphone in Washington, D.C. The power physically migrates with the herd.
It is bizarre to think that a migration trend, like the one we are seeing right now with people moving towards the Sun Belt, is essentially rewriting the political map without a single vote even being cast.
It completely shapes the battlefield before the war even starts. But it gets even stickier at the local level, because once you have all those people packed into one specific place, the local government has to figure out how to manage them.
The classic too many cooks in the kitchen problem.
Right, but in this case, the kitchen is a major city, and the cooks are massive voting blocks with totally different menus. High density forces political complexity. You cannot run New York City with a casual town hall meeting where everyone just raises their hand.
You need bureaucracy.
You need layers of it. You need complex voting districts. And the research highlights that this creates massive tension. When you have high density, you inherently have conflicting interests fighting over the exact same square mile.
Like zoning laws. I feel like zoning is always a nightmare in cities.
Zoning is the ultimate battleground for density. You have one group desperately wanting affordable housing, another group wanting to preserve historic buildings, and a third wanting a commercial shopping center. In a rural area, you might have miles between neighbors, so what I do on my land doesn't really bother you.
But in a city, your choices are literally in my backyard.
Exactly. So density acts as a friction multiplier.
Friction multiplier. That is a great way to put it.
And that friction forces the government to create more rules, more oversight, and more distinct voting districts, just to try and keep the peace. It creates a tug of war that is entirely defined by how close we are standing to one another.
So power follows the people. But let's be cynical for a second here. In the modern world, political power is usually just a proxy for capital.
Oh, they are absolutely two sides of the same coin.
Which brings us to segment 2 of our deep dive, following the money, or as the source notes call it, the economic processes of density.
This is where we see a massive split between what geographers call the virtuous cycle and the vicious cycle.
Let's start with the virtuous one. I assume this is what happens in the booming, growing cities.
Correct. And it is driven entirely by efficiency. If you are a business, let's say you're opening a high-end coffee chain, where are you going to put your flagship store?
Well, where the caffeine addicts are.
Right. You go to the density. Market incentives naturally drive businesses to cluster. They need that critical mass of labor to work the espresso machines and a critical mass of consumers to actually buy the product. So the businesses move in, which brings jobs, which brings more people, which in turn brings more businesses.
It's a snowball effect.
It is. But here is the kicker. The government plays favorites here too. And mathematically, they have to. It's a cold, hard efficiency calculation.
How so? Because I would think the government tries to at least appear fair to everyone, regardless of where they live.
In theory, sure. But imagine you are a state planner and you have a limited budget to fix exactly one bridge. Bridge A is in a dense city and carries 100,000 cars a day. Bridge B is out in a rural county and carries maybe 50 tractors a day. Which one do you fix?
You fix the city bridge, you get way more bang for your buck.
Exactly. Dense areas receive prioritized funding for infrastructure. Roads, hospitals, high-speed internet, they all go to the city first because the return on investment measured in public utility per dollar is infinitely higher.
So if you live in the swarm, you get the shiny new stadium and the state-of-the-art trauma center, but this obviously creates a loser in the equation. The vicious cycle.
This is the incredibly tough story of sparse or declining populations, and the source material points to the Rust Belt in the U.S. as the textbook historical example of this.
I feel like Rust Belt is a term everyone has heard, but we rarely stop to actually unpack the human geography of it. What structurally happened there?
Well, if you look at the mid-20th century, that Midwest region was a density powerhouse. Manufacturing, steel, auto outbound, it drew millions of people seeking good jobs. But starting in the 1950s, the economic logic of the globe shifted. Manufacturing jobs moved overseas or down to the south.
And when the jobs moved, the people moved.
A massive population exodus, and this is exactly where the cycle turns vicious. As people leave, the local tax base shrinks. The city physically has less money coming in. But, and this is the vital part, they still have all those roads and pipes and schools to maintain. The infrastructure doesn't shrink just because the population does.
Wow, so they have to raise taxes on the people who stayed behind.
Or cut services. Usually a painful combination of both. Businesses see the shrinking population and they close up shop because there aren't enough customers. The government stops investing in new infrastructure because that critical mass simply isn't there anymore.
It sounds like a complete economic death spiral.
It leads to what economists call cost of service inflation. Think about a standard yellow school bus. In a highly dense city, that bus can pick up 50 kids in a 3-block radius. It's efficient and it's cheap.
And in a rural area.
That same bus might have to drive 50 miles of winding, empty roads just to pick up those same 50 kids. The fuel, the driver's time, the vehicle maintenance, it costs significantly more per person to provide the exact same level of education.
So services just become incredibly expensive, or in some cases, they just disappear entirely. Hospitals consolidate, schools close down.
Exactly. And the lack of services drives even more people to leave, which just makes the problem worse for whoever is left. It is a brutal reminder that money doesn't just appear out of thin air. It intensely follows the density.
Okay, so we have reshaped our government and we've reshaped our economy based on where we cluster. But I want to talk about us now, the actual human beings inside these data points.
The social processes. This is what some geographers call the urban social experiment.
I love that title because we really aren't evolved for this, are we? I mean, for 99% of human history, we were wandering tribes or living in very small villages. We were not meant to live in concrete hives stacked 50 stories high.
No, biologically we weren't. And that rapid shift to high-density living fundamentally changes the quality of our lives and the very structure of our relationships.
The sources list some really fascinating trade-offs here, because it's not all bad, obviously.
No, not at all. Let's look at the pros first. If you are in a dense area, you generally have access to specialized services that simply cannot exist anywhere else.
Like what kind of services?
Think about healthcare. If you have a highly rare heart condition, you aren't going to find a specialist in a town of 500 people.
Mm.
You need a population base of millions to financially support that one niche surgeon. So cities offer a level of expertise and education that is vastly superior simply because the talent pool is deeper.
And here is a stat from the research that actually surprised me. Safety. The common perception, especially in media, is that cities are inherently dangerous, crime-ridden places.
It's a very common trope, but statistically speaking, large urban centers can actually be safer in terms of emergency response.
Mm.
You have concentrated police forces, fire stations every few blocks, much faster ambulance response times. Plus, there are just more eyes on the street.
But then, of course, there's the housing, the eternal urban struggle.
The squeeze. High density inevitably leads to fierce competition for space. Housing becomes smaller, it becomes massively more expensive, and it becomes scarce. You trade a sprawling backyard for a tiny balcony, if you're lucky.
But the thing that really stopped me in my tracks in this section, the real aha moment for me, was the part about the family unit.
Yes,
That's
this is a subtle shift, but sociologically, it is massive.
because we usually think of family as a purely cultural thing. You know, this is just how we were raised. But the research suggests that urbanization actually physically reshapes our family structure.
It absolutely drives the transition from the extended family to the nuclear family.
Break that down for us. How does a building change a family?
Okay, picture a rural setting. An agrarian society. You have space, you have a farm, and you need labor to work that farm. So grandma, grandpa, the cousins, the parents, and 5 kids all live in the same compound or the same large farmhouse. That is the extended family. It functions as a cohesive economic unit.
Right. Multi-generational living. Everyone is pitching in.
Now take that exact same family and move them into a high-density city to work in factories or office buildings. Urban real estate is incredibly expensive. Apartments are small. A 600-square-foot apartment physically cannot hold 3 generations of people.
So the family creates a new architecture to match the building's architecture.
Exactly. The family unit shrinks. It becomes just parents and children. The nuclear family isn't just a cultural preference that popped up out of nowhere. It is a direct adaptation to density. You physically prune the family tree just to fit inside the box.
That is wild to think about. We always think we build the cities, but the cities are actually building us.
It changes everything. It changes childcare. You don't have grandma living down the hall to watch the baby anymore, so you have to pay for commercial daycare. It changes how we treat the elderly, who are often moved to separate care facilities instead of staying in the home. It changes our entire social support network, all because of the cost of square footage.
It is a profound consequence that we totally overlook when we are just staring at economic charts. We're fundamentally changing how humans relate to one another.
We are. But there is one final consequence from the sources we really have to address, and it's the one that arguably matters the most in the long run.
Right. Can the planet actually handle the party?
The environmental consequence.
We've talked about political pressure and we've talked about economic pressure. Now we're talking about physical pressure on the Earth itself.
Because when you concentrate millions of people in one single spot, you create a massive pressure point on the local ecosystem. It is like poking a balloon with a sharp needle instead of pressing on it with your flat hand.
The sources list the direct hits here pretty clearly.
Yeah.
Deforestation, soil depletion, huge biodiversity loss.
And severe pollution. We see this in the real world constantly. High-density urban centers, places like Delhi, Mexico City, Los Angeles, they create what are essentially heat islands and massive pollution traps.
Because the local environment just can't disperse the human waste fast enough. You have too many cars, too many AC units, too much sewage in one deeply confined space.
Exactly. This leads us to the biggest concept for this segment, the term you will see in absolutely every human geography textbook, carrying capacity.
Let's define that carefully for you listening because it sounds like a hard fixed limit, sort of like the maximum occupancy sign you see on an elevator.
Technically speaking, it is the maximum population size an environment can sustain indefinitely without collapsing, without causing damage that the ecosystem just can't bounce back from.
So what is the number? What is Earth's actual carrying capacity?
Well, that is the great debate. If you ask 10 different geographers, you're going to get 10 completely different answers.
Really? I feel like science should have given us a concrete number by now. Is it 10 billion? 15?
Just isn't that simple. Viewpoint A, let's call them the pessimists, or the Malthusians, they argue we have already exceeded it. They point to severe climate change, to forced migration from droughts, and they say the tank is empty. We are running on fumes right now.
And viewpoint B, the other side of the source material.
Viewpoint B is the techno-optimists. They argue that human beings are incredibly ingenious. They say the planet could theoretically support over 1 trillion people.
1 trillion! That sounds insane. We would be literally standing on each other's shoulders.
It sounds impossible if we keep living the exact way we live right now.
Yeah.
And that is the crucial nuance that almost everyone misses in this debate. Carrying capacity isn't just about a fixed number of heads to count. It depends heavily on consumption variance.
Okay, explain consumption variance.
It is not just about how many people exist. It is about how much stuff those people actually use.
Right. A billionaire flying around in a private jet uses a lot more Earth than a rural farmer in a developing nation.
Exactly. Wealthy populations, primarily like the US and Europe, consume far more natural resources than is actually necessary for human survival. We buy fast fashion, we throw away 30% of our food, we air-condition massive, mostly empty houses.
So if everyone lived like a minimalist monk, the carrying capacity of the planet would actually be huge?
Right. If everyone consumed only what they needed for basic survival, the Earth could support many, many more of us. So the core problem isn't necessarily that there are 8 billion people. The problem is the wildly uneven distribution of how we consume resources.
That is a pretty heavy realization. It really shifts the blame, doesn't it? It's not just, oh, those other countries have way too many people. It's, wait, maybe I am personally using way too much stuff.
It forces us to look in the mirror. The limits of the Earth are elastic. They stretch or they snap, depending entirely on our behavior.
So let's bring this all in for a landing. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
If we recap the sources, we see a very clear pattern. Population distribution is the invisible hand guiding our lives.
It moves political power. It literally takes congressional seats away from shrinking states and hands them to growing ones, changing the laws we all have to live by.
It dictates where the money goes, creating a virtuous cycle of growth for dense cities and a vicious cycle for the rust belts of the world, leaving sparse areas with much higher costs and way fewer services.
It changes us socially, shrinking our families from large extended clans down to nuclear units just so we can fit inside expensive urban apartments.
And finally, it tests the planet's actual physical limits, challenging us to figure out if the real problem is our raw numbers or our massive appetites.
It really makes you look at your own city differently. You know, you aren't just sitting in traffic, you are sitting inside a data point that is actively shaping the world.
You really are. And that actually brings me to a final thought I would love for the listener to chew on after we wrap up.
No, go for it.
We spent a lot of time just now on carrying capacity. And we established that the debate really hinges on consumption, not just raw population numbers. So here's the question. If we are actually worried about the Earth surviving, does the solution really lie in population control, trying to forcefully reduce the number of humans? Or is the real, much harder challenge a fundamental redesign of how wealthy populations consume resources?
Oof. That is a big one to leave us with. I mean, it is a lot easier to just say there are too many people than to say I need to fundamentally change my own life.
Exactly. But the geography suggests the latter might be the only variable we can actually ethically control.
Well, on that provocative note, we are going to wrap up this deep dive.
It has been a pleasure going through this.
We really hope you take a look around your own town this week. Look at the roads, the hospitals, the empty lots. Ask yourself, why is this here? And what does it actually say about the people living around it?
Keep asking those questions.
Thanks for diving in with us. We will catch you on the next one.